Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Good Grief with Auntie Bird. We're back, and I don't want to keep saying like I have very special guests because like everybody's special, but when I say special, like, do you really feel special if you're not like this special?
One's for real special.
But this one's like for real special. Like I've grown to like love this beautiful person so much. We've grown like really, really close. Mm-hmm. I'm going to do like a soft intro, and then you can give like your full intro because LG does a lot. But I have here Laura. Do you want me to say your last name?
You can.
Okay. I have here Laura Green. I call her LG because she's so sweet, and I'm LB.
And I used to be LB.
You
also.
used to be LB.
Yeah.
She's married, so she's not LB anymore. But I met you at Plywood, well, at work. Mm-hmm. My work, her, whatever. And we kind of like just hit it off.
Yeah.
We hit it off very well.
Yeah, we came, I feel like we became very close really fast.
Yeah. And she went through some things, but before we jump in and I'll talk about what this episode is going to be about, I do want you to introduce yourself, like, because I don't want to leave out anything.
Okay, so I'm Laura. I do a lot of things.
She does.
I am a wife.
Yes.
I'm a mother. I have 3 children who are lovely and challenging.
Mm-hmm. She had a baby for me.
They are 6, 3, and 5 months. Mm-hmm. And for work, I am a strategist, so I help mostly lots of entrepreneurs, mostly founders, sort of recapture and recenter the vision of the work that they're doing and then build strategies and systems that help them do it.
Cool person.
I spent a lot of time in my garden.
You became the garden lady today.
Yeah.
The official rep.
Yeah. It's like I feel like a significant part of my personality.
Yes.
My gardening.
Yeah.
I guess that's a nutshell.
Yeah.
I like shoes. I like beer.
I like shoes. First of all, sidebar, her shoe game is crazy. I hate on her shoe game. Every time she comes in, every time I see her, it's ridiculous.
Thank you.
Yeah,
just trying to keep up.
Yeah,
you know?
Not with me because I have dirty sneakers.
With the people.
Right, whatever. But so of course you guys already know that I am just kind of diving into like grief and what it looks like in all aspects and how it can show up and where it can show up. And I wanted to like tap into some subjects that I personally don't hear like full stories about. I think you hear about what happened and then you just let it.
Yeah, you
don't bring it up. Yeah. So for this specific topic, I did want to discuss moms or women grieving miscarriages, and specifically miscarriages and not abortions, because I don't know if I've never had either, but but I wanted to
I suspect it's a different kind of grief.
Right. But I wanted to kind of like dive into like that story and your emotions behind it. How did you heal from it, and all of those things, or what does healing look like, if it's healed or not, and like what was happening during, before, and after. And whatever you don't want to answer, you don't have to.
Yeah, no, I feel very comfortable talking openly about it because I think you're right. With a lot of kinds of loss, people hear like, oh, her parent died, or, you know, she had a miscarriage or whatever, but a lot of times it doesn't feel appropriate to dig into those things. Yeah. And I think that's why this project is so important, because when you're the one in it, because nobody talks about those things, you feel alone.
Yeah.
And I think miscarriage especially, and lots of women's things, are things that we just don't talk about.
Yeah.
So, you know, of course, most miscarriages happen in the first trimester, the early parts of pregnancy. And so at that time, a lot of women haven't even started telling people that they're pregnant. And so they're really grieving kind of almost silently or very alone.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of parts of women's health and therefore miscarriage that people just don't really talk about. So, I guess the sort of like short version of the story is that this was a year and a half ago. So I had a 1.5-year-old and a 4.5-year-old. And to be honest, I was surprised to find out that I was pregnant.
I remember this. Yeah.
I was like, what? We're going to do what?
Yeah.
And then I had a really difficult first trimester. So you probably remember I was sick all the time. I had headaches all the time. I was like, couldn't eat. I was very, I was really sick.
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks into the second trimester, when you're in the like safe zone, I had a miscarriage. It happened very suddenly. It was really gruesome. Like, I don't know how much you want to talk about.
I mean, however much you want to share.
Details. Yeah, it was gross. It was, it was really brutal.
Were you at home?
I was at home. Yeah. And I just, I hadn't been feeling well anyway. I was just feeling like kind of sick. Like I felt like I had a fever or something.
Yeah.
And then I just felt like what I now know was my water breaking.
Yeah.
And I ran to the bathroom and passed a fetus. And so it just went from like, you know, being all the way pregnant.
Yeah.
And like, yay, second trimester, let's go.
Yeah.
To being like, you know, hit in the face with this thing. And it was just like so real and visible and physical.
Yeah. Question.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I'm like thinking about, like, as you're speaking, I'm like visualizing this thing. And you've shared this with me. We haven't like dived deep into it, but you've shared it with me.
Yeah.
And every time I try to picture it, I can't. It's like I can't.
Yeah.
I can't. So it's like with you being the mom who's passed, like, what was going through your head? Like, it's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah, it was wild. It was like I knew from the way that my body was feeling that something wasn't right.
Yeah.
And so I like called my husband. I was like, I don't know, something's wrong. And then it's just like when I saw that, like, this is the fetus, like, that I'm holding now, was just like, I don't know, shock is, I guess, the only word I can think of. It was just like, this cannot be real.
Yeah.
And it's, again, this is really kind of graphic, but because it was obviously very small. So it's like not a thing that we're used to seeing at all anyway. So just like making sense of what I'm even looking at, and then trying to reconcile that with what this means about, like.
And you were by yourself?
Well, my husband was there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the kids were asleep, thank God.
Yeah.
It was just like an overwhelming amount to process. And you know that what happened after that was also very traumatic. Like, I had a really terrible experience at the hospital. I hemorrhaged twice, so I went into shock and basically almost died.
Yeah.
And we've said, thinking back, that in some ways it made it a lot easier because we knew that the baby was gone. It wasn't like we went to the hospital hoping that it was going to be okay. Like, we went to the hospital knowing what was what. And at that point, it was just like, let's just try to stay alive, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
We went to the hospital after that. It was rough.
Yeah. Because this is the part of, like, miscarriages that I don't hear about, like, at all. Like, that after you pass. I know I knew, like, one other person who miscarried, like, at home. She didn't tell me about her experience, and I didn't ask about her experience, like, right after. So you're at the hospital. How long were you in the hospital?
Well, there's a lot of things about this that are not, like, I don't want to, like, oversimplify other people's experiences by calling them typical, but there is a lot of things about this that were sort of unusual, partly because I was much further along than most miscarriages happen.
Yeah.
I was 14 weeks pregnant, and they tell you to, after you've passed the fetus, they call it a product of conception. They don't call it a fetus anymore. So they tell you to bring it with you.
Wait.
Just because they want to, like, make sure that whatever you have, they want you to bring with you, because they want you to make sure that, like, they want to check to make sure that, like,
traumatizing.
Yeah.
That is traumatizing.
Yeah, they want to make sure that, like, you're not confused about what you
passed,
or
my
be
God.
able to verify that everything's, like, the right, like, just that makes sense of everything.
So you passed your child.
Yep.
You had to
I wrapped
get your
her up.
child wrapped.
Yep.
You knew the gender.
Yeah, it was a girl. We nicknamed her Lulu.
Wow.
We had never decided on a name, but we wanted her nickname to be Lulu, so that's just what we called her.
So you wrapped Lulu up.
Yep.
And you had to, while you're still going through physically everything that you're going through, your husband who had to come and get you.
Yep. So we put the...
I'm sorry, because I don't want to sound like unprofessional because this is the part I didn't hear.
Yeah.
I didn't hear this part.
Yeah, and I even and this is the part that you have to talk about, right? Because like even in other situations, like I read this whole thread online about like, did you other women who had miscarriages, and they were talking about like, did you flush your miscarriage, and do you feel guilty about that? It's like a real thing that like when that happens to you, these are conversations that you've had before, and so nobody knows like what you're supposed to do. And you're at the same time like,
oh gosh,
emotion. I know, and you're like wanting to hang on to this thing because it's been a huge part of all of your thinking and eating and drinking, you know, and at the same time like hold it, like what are your choices, like, you know,
right?
Yeah, it's just as a weird kind of decision making.
It is, and the process of like you actually having to wrap this child up that you just passed, who you carried for 14 weeks, and taking this child just to make sure like you know what's happening, or maybe you don't. Maybe you don't know what's happening. For somebody to confirm with you, to me, it sounds like a double whammy. Like you just had a miscarriage, and also
honestly, the way the hospital handled the miscarriage was astonishing to me. I mean, this is not that unusual of a thing, right? Like, it's something like, I want to say 1 in 3, 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. So maybe that's not right, but a lot.
Yeah.
So it's not that unusual of a thing, right? Like, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
And so it just seems to me like an emergency room would like know about them.
Yeah.
But my case was also, I had been bleeding a lot. I continued to lose a lot of blood when we got to the hospital. And so at triage, they sort of like, you know, asked about my symptoms and then sent us to the side. And my husband was with me, of course, and was like, at this point I had lost enough blood that I was like flopping all over the place. Like I could barely hold myself up. And so he went and was like, hey, can you check her blood pressure again? Because she's, I don't think, doing well. And as soon as they took my blood pressure,
that's when it became serious enough for you to.
They were like, she needs a room.
Not that you just had a miscarriage. It wasn't that serious then.
Right.
This is blowing my mind.
So then they take me back to the room and they're like, okay, we're going to see if you need a transfusion, and we're going to check on, you know, what all your blood levels are. And they did. Part of the problem and why I ended up having to go back a second time is because they basically weren't thorough in their scans and making sure that, like, they're supposed to check and make sure that everything has cleared or has passed. And they didn't do that.
What else should have passed? Like,
well, they missed, because they weren't thorough, they missed that, like, a part of the placenta hadn't passed, which is fairly common. That's why they're supposed to check. And so that meant that eventually I went home, and then 3 days later went back because my body was trying to discharge the part that hadn't. Yeah.
Did that feel like a miscarriage again? Like that same feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what was happening that time, so emotionally it felt totally different. Yeah. Physically, it was a very similar experience. And at that point, like, I was past being sad. I just was mad, you know? I just was like, what? Like, I think I want to be careful about this because I know a lot of women struggle a lot to conceive. Yes. Which is its own kind of grief. Right. That wasn't a part of my journey. Like I said, I was like, oh, hey, look there, we're expecting. Right. So that was a lot of what felt really unfair to me, because it was like, here's this thing that, like, I'm excited about, but I didn't go looking for this. Yeah. And now it's gone.
Because you got excited about it.
Right. Yeah. And not only is it gone, but, like, we're going to come this close to killing you while you lose this thing that you really didn't ask for to begin with, and then became excited about. So it just felt a lot of unfair. Yeah. But yes, at the hospital, they treated me until they felt like I was stable enough to send me home. And what really was surprising to me, you know, when I told you I was surprised at how the hospital handled it, is that, you know, I asked the nurse, I was like, so, like, what do I expect now? Like, how should I expect, like, in terms of, like, my symptoms and my healing?
Yeah.
And she was like, I don't really know. We should probably, you could ask your OB. And she just had no idea.
This is the nurse.
Yeah, and she was a pretty good nurse. And I was like, she's obviously competent, right? She knows what she's doing. Again, miscarriages are not uncommon.
Yeah.
And she just had no idea. She just was like, I don't know. And so at that point, it's like it can't be her fault as an individual, you know? At this point, this is like a bigger issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just were like, yeah, I don't know. You could call your doctor. And then they just sent me with paperwork, and the, like, hospital summary includes, like, a list of your symptoms and what you were treated for. And it says things in there like, in my case, it said, like, treated for risk of shock, was at risk for pulmonary failure, cardiac failure, all these different things. And then under the, like, care instructions, it's like, rest and hydrate. And I was just like,
even though you could possibly have a heart attack.
Right, yeah. So the whole thing is, like, basically, like, all of these important systems, we were treating you to prevent dying.
Yes.
But now just drink some water. And
go to sleep.
That's probably cool.
So what's happening with you once you left the hospital after almost dying?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Like, what's happening with you mentally, like, at home now?
Yeah, I think for me, and I suspect for a lot of women who have a miscarriage, which is a terrible name, by the way, like, I didn't miscarry.
It's not my fault.
Right.
Yeah.
like,
It's not my fault.
It made me sound like I dropped it or something.
Yeah.
You know, like, that's not.
Yeah.
But anyway.
That's interesting that you said that. That's an interesting take. But
yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
I
it's
thought
not my
that so
fault.
many times since then, like, there's got to be a better word to use for this. But, yeah, physically, I was so focused on my physical recovery that it took me a while to even get to the, like, emotional part. And I think that that's probably true even in, like, probably less traumatic experiences where it's just like my body hurts, like, you're tired, you're having, like, all this cramping and stuff, and it's just so my mind first was on, like, paying attention to what was happening to my body. In my case, I couldn't even sit up without getting out of breath, and because my poor husband had watched me go through all of these things, I wasn't allowed to stand up by myself. I needed somebody to I just didn't have the energy. I had lost so much blood. So that's where I was first. And again, I think I was more angry than anything for such a long time because it just was, like, such an like, it just made my life hard. You know?
Yeah.
And it just felt,
because everything after that changed. Yeah. Like, the role that you played in your household changed. The role that you played as a business owner changed. Your spaces that you were coming to, everything changed.
Yeah, and it was like all of a sudden everything stopped, and, you know, like, it took me months to come back.
Yeah.
And part of that was about, like, emotionally feeling like I could be around people again. But part of that was just, like, having the physical stamina. You remember when I first came back, going from the front of the building to the bathroom.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to have to take a break when I get there because just physically it just took me a long time. So
how did you explain this to, like, what I want to know, how did you explain this to the kids? Because at this point, like, they know that we were supposed to be having a brother or a sister, and your oldest was she was like 4 or 5 years old. 4.5, so, like, they know exactly like what's happening. So, like, how did you explain it to your kids? Because in my head, that's a whole nother grieving process.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty straightforward with her about most things. So we just told her, like, you know, there was a baby in mommy's tummy, and she was excited about it because it was a girl. She was so excited about having a sister, and we were like, you know, we don't know why, we don't know what happened, but the baby died, and so and so I think that's sort of all we said in that moment. But in the conversations that followed, we had a lot of, kids are so wise.
Yeah. They know more than we think.
And she always said, well, like, it sort of feels like I still have a sister. And I was like, yeah, she'll always be a part of our family.
Yeah.
And, you can say that you feel like you have a sister. I feel like I have 4 children.
Yeah.
So she'll always be a part of our family and a part of our story.
Yeah.
She's just not here.
Yeah.
And the stuff that we think is going to be hard for kids, sometimes she's just like, yeah, of course.
Yeah. Like, I understand it.
So she sobbed for a few minutes and then got up and started jumping around. And so,
Did this like affect you and Jeremy? I didn't mean to say your husband's name.
That's okay.
Oh, sorry, Jeremy.
My husband's name's Jeremy. I think that I won't say it didn't affect us, but
or like, how did you see it? Like, how did it affect like your personal relationship with him? Like,
I think, and again, I think that this is probably fairly common for women in similar experiences. This didn't come from him. This came from me.
Yeah.
But I felt a lot like guilty is not the right word, but just that I had like disappointed him or like failed him in some way, just because like he was excited for having this baby. Mm-hmm. Carrying the baby was my thing to do. Mm-hmm. And again, it's not that I didn't miscarry. It's not like I did something wrong.
Right.
But it also was like my body's thing to do, and my body didn't do it.
Yeah, right.
And so I think that made me he never made me feel like that at all.
Like less than, or it was yeah.
But I felt a little bit like I just had maybe not been able to
give him something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just like I had maybe disappointed him or
something
like that.
Did you feel like you disappointed yourself?
Yeah, I did. And I felt also because there was this miscarriage was so eventful and complicated. It really, I did not feel like safe in my body. Like it took me a very long time to feel safe in my body again, because it was like my body didn't like I didn't keep this baby alive, and I almost didn't keep myself alive.
Yeah.
So
whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah. And I am like I'm sort of like a hippie, listen to your body, do what you need, follow your natural rhythms kind of person.
And now we got a trust issue.
Yeah. And now I'm like, well, my natural rhythms almost took me out.
Right.
So now what?
Yeah. Did
so
you become
really
fixated on that though? That's because... Yeah, because your relationship, the person that I do know, like your relationship with your body is very positive. Yeah. Like you do listen to it. But now that then there was like a trust issue. Yeah. Did you become fixated on like either like not dying or either keeping the babies alive that you do have, or like...
I think that really what I had to come to in order to to not end up in that headspace.
Yeah.
I really had to come to, and some people think that this sounds like insane, so if this doesn't resonate, then that's fine. But for me, it was helpful to sort of reframe and think that like it's not that I felt like this was supposed to end in a certain thing, right? Like this was supposed to create a baby who was our third child, who was a part of our family.
When did you get there though? Like when did you get to that point?
What I had to shift in my mind was, instead of thinking about it that way, I had to think about like, it's not that I failed at doing what I thought this was supposed to do. It's just that I was wrong about what this was supposed to do. It's not that it went wrong. It just was different than what I thought.
Yeah.
And once I could come to that place, I was able to be a lot more gracious with myself and my body, and not live in that like panic mode all of the time. I just had to come to that place that like it's not like this was a thing that then went wrong. It's just a different thing than I thought it was.
When did you get to that point though? Like, or was it something that you said, like, hey, I can't stay here for this. Like, mentally, I can't stay here because I'll start to spiral.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a good question. To be honest, it took a long time. It took a few, like, months at least to get there. And a lot of, this is something that I think most people who are grieving have in common. Like, I didn't feel like the world really had time for me to grieve. I just was annoyed because nobody here in our workspace or anywhere was like, hey, get over it. Yeah. But I just felt like the world is not stopping.
Not at all.
Even the most well-meaning people are just going about their business.
It keeps going.
And I wanted to just be like, stop.
Yes.
Like, a thing has
just happened.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's still happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Something is still happening.
I need a minute.
Yeah. It's like mommy can't stop.
Yeah.
Like wife can't stop. Mentally, this is just for you. Bills don't stop.
Right.
It just keeps going. I totally get that.
Yeah. So I think that's what I wrestled with the most at first.
Yeah.
Was just feeling like
that's a common thread in grief.
Yeah.
I'm noticing.
Yeah. And I just felt like, my garden's really important to me.
Yeah.
And one thing that I learned from is that in any season in the garden, there's always something that's dying and something that's blooming or fruiting or whatever. And so there's really never we're in the summertime, there's a lot more blooming now than usual, but there's never any time when nothing's growing, and there's never any time that nothing's dying. And so that was really helpful for me. This was in October.
I need to garden.
Yeah, you can come over.
Yeah, that's a word
it speaks
right there.
to me. Yes,
no, that's a
this
whole
is why
word.
I say like my garden is my church. It just teaches me things
wow.
that I don't learn anywhere else. And I just and it was in the fall, so there were a lot of things dying and a lot of things still blooming. And so I just that visual helped me, that it was like there's all of these things happening that are blooming and still going on with their lives.
Yeah. And
there's some stuff that's just laying here dead.
Yeah.
And those things can happen at the same time.
Yeah.
There is space for both of those.
Yeah.
And one doesn't make the other any less true, but it's okay for them to happen together.
First of all, that's a whole word. That's going to be a snapshot. That's a whole word. I want to ask you, because I'm a pivot a little bit.
Yeah.
But you were one of the first people who knew that I was going to start this podcast. Yeah. Before I even started, I think it was a year before I was talking about it. And I also think this was before it happened, right?
No, I think it was after.
Oh, a little bit after that it happened. This is what I remember specifically. And, this is what I remember specifically, because this was after my dad passed away as well. We were outside and eating lunch, and you wanted to go to this container, the container down the street. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I'll walk with LG. And this was your first time back. This was one of the first times you got back. And I remember walking with you, and I asked, I was like, hey, how are you doing? And you gave me the regular, I'm fine, I'm good. And I stopped you.
You were like, no.
And I was like, no, how are you doing?
Yeah.
And I remember you turned to me and you said, thank you for asking me that, because people don't ask me about it.
Yeah.
People just kind of bypass it. And I think we probably both started crying.
Yeah.
But when you said that, one, I knew I need to start this. And then two, I was like, oh, there's a very common thread with grief, because people just kind of bypass other people's hurt and feelings. But touch on people. Did you want people to ask you how you were doing? Did you need it?
Yeah, I did. I really did. And I think people, people don't ask because they're afraid to ask. You know? And it's
they don't know
maybe
what
they
to
don't
say.
want to talk about it right now. And there's some of that is for good reason.
Yeah.
But I think people need you to ask.
Yeah.
Probably more often than not.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted people to ask.
Yeah.
And even it's been a year and a half since this happened. So on the anniversary, that was felt like a significant date to me. And I was really surprised at how many people who were very close to me didn't say anything at all. And for me, I was like not sure how I was going to feel about the day, but I knew I needed to do something with the day.
Yeah.
And there were so many people who, and I brought it up to some people, and I remember having a conversation with a family member who was like, yeah, I had said like, I don't know if you realize, but this is the 1 year. And she was like, I did realize, and I've been thinking about it. I just didn't know if you wanted to talk about it. But I think like we need there to be space for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, because it's still happening. Like, I'm still grieving something in some type of way. And I feel like when people don't ask, or when people, and it's uncomfortable. Yeah. Right? Because you've been in a space where you're like, I don't know, you want to talk about it. Actually, I think you are a person that really asks questions, so.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. Like, LG always asks me questions. Yeah, I feel like you always ask me questions, but I know that it is uncomfortable, but I feel like when people don't ask or either do like a proper check-in, I feel like it minimizes the grief that I'm going through. Yeah. And I feel like it makes the person or thing that I'm grieving not exist.
Yeah, I think it's like, like we were saying before, we have to know, like when you feel like you're the only one that knows that this happened, or you feel like you're the only one that feels sad about it, it's so lonely.
It is.
To be lonely is hard, and to be sad is hard, and to be lonely about the sad is worse.
Yeah. It's like, what the heck is happening here?
So I do think it's really helpful, like, even if you're not sure whether you should ask or not, I do think it's so helpful to just know that, like, somebody else knows that there's something happening.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, that's a really big deal. I remember reading this thing. I'm going to go back into my hippie bag for a minute, but there's this book called The Secret Life of Trees, which is about trees. And it's about a lot about how they communicate with each other through mycelium, mushrooms, underground, fungus.
Okay, there we go.
So it's so nerdy and beautiful, and it's so cool.
Yeah. Look at this grin on your face.
I know.
Like,
I just like, once I get into this nerdy, I'm like, oh, there's no going back. It's out. The secret's out. So anyway, in the book, it talks about how, like, in a forest, right, there's lots of different trees, and trees like help their own species, but some of them help their other species. Yeah. And it also makes sense that, like, the oldest, most established trees have the most, like, nutrients to pull from. And so they use this network of fungus to share their nutrients with others, and they help each other stay alive and healthy. Yeah. But what's really interesting is that it doesn't just go one way. So the oldest and healthiest trees do share with younger or less healthy trees, but there are times when younger or less healthy trees share with the bigger ones because they know they need it. Yeah. And so I think, like, the part that we as humans are missing is that little, like, network that does that, like, sharing information for you. We still have to do the work to ask, but I think, again, like, that was just a really helpful picture for me to realize that, like, if you're the strong one or the grown one or the mature one or whatever, like, you're still gonna need help. Yep. That's to be expected.
And it can come from anything and anybody.
Yeah. And that there are other people who can help you.
Yes.
And they don't have to be people who have been through what you've gone through or who are older than you or whatever.
Yeah. That's interesting. Shout out to the trees in this whole tree book. Okay. So I think it's interesting because what I'm learning, and it's still hard for me to, like, cope with it.
Sure.
Or to see that it's some truth, right? But I am learning that things do. I hate things happen for a reason. That's not what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. It's ill. It's yuck. But there is a, like, direct link to a lesson, right? Okay. From whatever grief you're going through, there's a lesson within it. It's still something very hard for me to adjust to, but I am there to where I'm like, okay, well, now, not saying, oh, my parents are supposed to die for me to learn this, but now other things are just more important to me. Yeah. And now I see the value in healing, some healing of some sort, because with me, I can't stay in a space that I was staying in because, of course, it would have me spiraling. But also, when the bloom happened, because I'm trying to use this whole garden thing.
You don't have to.
Right.
It gets cheesy if you stick with it too long.
But when you said that, it was true, right? Because some parts of you, even in grieving, when it comes to you, like, out of the blue, like, it's still, something's very dormant. Something is still very much dead within me, right?
Yeah.
But other things are living. Other things are, like, growing. And, like, I've come to a place where, like, mentally I'm sustaining now. Yeah. And I'm ready to, like, create and grow in something new. And I feel like, not trying to tell your story, but I feel like with you, this, to me, it was a miracle. This beautiful miracle just kind of sprung up. Was it less than a year later?
Yeah, 6 months.
It was 6 months later that you...
I was pregnant again.
Yes, you were pregnant again. And were you afraid, before I go into it, were you afraid? Like, what was your relationship with your body then?
No, I wasn't afraid then. At that point, I'd gotten to the point where I had come to terms with that experience just being different. Again, like not being a failure, but being different.
Yeah.
And I think that it was also helpful for me to realize the ways that, like, in some ways my body didn't do what I had hoped it would, but it did keep me alive. Yeah. Actually.
Yeah, it did.
And it sent me lots of signals through, lots of discomfort and bleeding and whatever else.
Right.
But, like, hey, something's wrong here.
Yeah.
Tap, tap, tap. We need help. And so it was helpful for me to realize, like, I did need help, and it's okay to need help. Yeah. Right. But my body still did very much of what it was supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know enough about, like, medically speaking, why the miscarriage happened. So I don't know, what my body was doing then. But I know enough to know it was probably following some, doing something that bodies do.
Yeah.
So I sort of had that I had that, like, framework or that thinking in mind already when I was pregnant again. And so at that point, I just felt like it was very different. Like, it had almost nothing to do with it. And so there were some times where I would, if I felt, like, a little bit crampy, then I would be like, oh, that would make me a little nervous. But I didn't live in, like, constant panic or constant fear. I will say the other thing that I think was really helpful and probably unusual is that my medical care team with the pregnancies, not at the hospital, but with the pregnancies, was so good. Okay. And they were so
reassuring.
Yeah, and I was with the same group. I was at the birth center, so shout out to them.
Shout out to the birth center.
I was with them for both of those pregnancies, the miscarriage and the one after that. And so they knew what I had been through. And so at every single one of my appointments, they were like you did, like, how are you doing? Yeah. And so that it made it feel like there was space for that in this new experience, but also, like, it was different enough that I didn't feel like I was like, oh, I'm going to try not to fail this time. Right. I just felt like I'm going to do a different thing.
Right, right. And your body did.
Yeah.
That thing. And we have
a sweet baby boy now.
We have a sweet baby boy now. He's the sweetest little person ever. He smiles a lot. He's just, I can just bite him.
He's
sorry.
Real squishable.
Yeah, I'm, like, obsessed with her son.
Yeah.
But, like, I like to ask this question because to me, like I said, like, that's a whole miracle. But what do you think, like, let me stop. What do you think, THANK, your younger self for doing to prepare you for, like, this moment, or prepare you to prepare you for the work? Like, your younger self did some kind of work to mentally, spiritually do whatever. And I mean, even before the miscarriage happened. Yeah. Like, what do you thank that person for?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things that I did that was really helpful for me was, like, I've talked a lot about, like, being in my body and what it felt like to be in my body. And I did a lot of, like, therapy, but more specifically somatic experiencing, which is, like, this specific type of coaching or therapy where you're just paying attention to what your body feels like. I call it my my feel my feelings coach.
Yeah.
And so it's very much about like, okay, not just like, how does that make you feel in a like sort of cliche therapy kind of way, but like, what feedback is your body giving you right now? What do you notice?
Yeah.
And we're so used to like overriding that, both in terms of like, oh, I'm hungry, but I have a meeting, so I'm going to eat afterwards and just pretend like I'm not hungry.
And then become hangry in the
Right.
meeting. Right.
All the way down to like, no, I feel really sleepy because this big thing has happened and my brain needs space for that. And so like, I mean, there's a reason that mental health and physical symptoms go together, right? So I think having become really disciplined in that, or sort of finding my way in that practice of like noticing what I'm feeling, helped me in ways that I couldn't have prepared for otherwise, because it made me like I had space to be really gracious with myself and to take care of myself and receive care for myself. And it just gave me kind of like a roadmap to make sense of loss and healing. I don't think that I would have had the same kind of grace for myself if I hadn't already done some of that work.
And I asked that because one day I was sitting down and I was like, damn, I really could have been up out of here. Like mentally, I could have been up out of here. But I was like, wait, I did some, like I had to prepare for this. Like I did some work a few years back, or even in my 20s when I was going through this whole like super woke moment, you know. But honestly, you know, like it helped me to pull myself out of a situation. So like now I always like ask my friends, especially when we're going through like a tough time, like, hey, honestly, like, what do you think your younger self were doing? Because I feel like we pound on them because we should have done something better. But
no, I think that's really wise. Like, I think another thing that was helpful for me that I realized while you're talking is it's sort of related, but like giving yourself permission to move slowly and room to rest.
Because I'm saying, because we don't do that either. We don't. And also thinking that like you can hop back in and you're the same person. You're not.
Right.
Like, and coming to the realization, like, I'm not that person and it's okay.
Right.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. One last question. What is healing looking like for you right now?
That's a good question.
Do we celebrate Lulu? Do we have...
We don't celebrate Lulu.
Yeah.
I thought...
Side note, my best friend called my mom Lulu, so it's interesting.
That's cute.
Yeah.
Have we talked about that? I don't think I
knew
that.
No.
No, I don't... When it was the 1 year anniversary, I thought about this a lot too. Like, what do I want this day to be? And I don't celebrate it. It's just sad. And that's fine. I feel comfortable with that. Somebody said to me immediately after the loss, they said that like losing a pregnancy when you already have living children is like especially hard because you have some idea of like how wonderful they were going to be. And you've met my kids. Like, I know every parent thinks this, but like
they're pretty dope.
They make the world a different, better place. Like every parent thinks this about their kid. And it's like I see the way that they change the world around them. And so it's like if Lulu had made it here for any amount of time, she would have done that too. Right. And I feel really sad that I didn't get to know that and see that in
the physical
form.
way
that I expected. And so that feels really sad. And in some ways, her being a part of my life and my experience does impact and change the world. Because of stuff like this.
She gets to be a part of stories untold. You know.
And so I think that, you know, when I thought about like what I wanted to do on that 1 year anniversary is like it makes me wish that I could celebrate. I just want to honor it, wishing that I could celebrate and honoring that this was a really big thing that
changed you.
And that was sad.
What does healing look like for you?
I think healing is, do you mean like in practice or like what I...
In practice.
Mm-hmm. I think it really is about like making time for myself to be with what I need to be with.
Yeah.
Like, it's important to me that like I don't want to forget her.
Right.
And I really love what my daughter said. Like she'll always be a part of our family.
Yeah.
And I want it to feel that way.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, like I have this safe little space in my heart for like what she was and is to us. And I, you know, life is busy and crazy. And I don't. You know, if we got too busy, it would be easy to forget that little space.
Yeah.
And that little space doesn't have to hurt all the time.
Right.
I just want to, I want it to stay there. And so I think for me, like, I need to continue to like spend time and sort of revisit that so that I can carry it, but carry it in a way that feels like healthy and not is only angry.
And only sadness. Yeah. LG, I do want to say something to you.
Okay.
No crying stuff, but I just think you're like one of the most bravest person ever. And I really do appreciate like you sharing, even before the podcast. I appreciate like you sharing with me your story, and I appreciate you asking me about mine or like how I'm feeling. She often says like, do you need some mommying right now? And honestly, like, if somebody came up and heard you say it, they would laugh. But like, I think sometimes that I need it. And mommies give different energy. And like, I really do appreciate you for sharing space for my healing, but also being vulnerable enough to speak about something so crazy, traumatic, and beautiful all at the same time. Like your story is it's an untold or unspoken thing that so many women go through, and I think that you are very brave for sharing this, and I love you. I love you so much. I love you so much. I want to thank you for coming on my podcast, for sharing that story.
Happy to be here.
I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So thank you guys again for listening and watching another episode of Good Grief with Auntie Bird. LG just came on and dropped some knowledge. If you guys need to know about how we need to communicate, just read a book about trees.
The trees will teach us so many things.
The trees will teach us what we need to know.
Go outside.
That's it.
Yeah.
Thank y'all. Bye.
Bye.